You've got Joe Kyriakos and Chris Hayes here again from Subject7. I think many of you guys may know us already, aside from practically being twins, as you can tell, at least in terms of our selection of genetically predisposed hairstyles. We do work very closely together day in and day out at Subject7. I help to lead our client engagement and our work with our customers. And Chris is one of our technical experts that helps to ensure that our clients are successful in their use of Subject7. And I can see that we've got some attendees that are existing Subject7 customers and users. So for you guys, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you and of course for all of your support. And I see we've got some others that are considering Subject7. So we want to say welcome to you guys and thanks for investing an hour or so to learn a little bit more about us. So jumping right into it, we're here today and we're going to talk a little bit about advanced topics in codeless automation. And I guess you may be asking yourselves, or at least I want to just kind of call this out a little bit, maybe get us thinking about it. Why do we need a session to cover topics that some of us, particularly those of us that are testing experts, may really consider to be kind of bread and butter issues, right? I mean, like, when it comes to testing, and I'll describe why, and I'm gonna kind of tackle this or maybe nibble at it a couple different ways before I hand over to Chris to kind of show you guys what we're doing in this space. So why it's important at the end of the day, and really why we are here as vendors, to make it faster and easier to create intelligent and sophisticated test cases, and to make it possible to do it all codelessly. And you may be asking yourselves as well, like, why does being codeless matter? And I'll tell you why, and I'll describe it a little bit, at least in terms of an example. So, like historically, if we're dealing with an advanced test automation scenario, let's just say like end-to-end testing, right? You'd need to be a coder and you'd need to have some experience across a number of different technical disciplines. I mean, imagine a test case where, we're going to interact with a web UI, we're going to feed in multiple rounds of data. We are going to read and verify some APIs, and just to make it fun, we'll even say that we're going to, write or retrieve some database values too. And so more than likely, in addition to having coding experience across a number of different domains, you're probably also going to be using a number of different tools, or at least frameworks, to make an end-to-end scenario like the one I just described work. And so you'll get a chance to see this when I hand over to Chris. But the reason this starts to get a little bit important, or at least we think it's becoming more and more important, is because we've made it easy to create those advanced test cases by having some built-in constructs in our product that just make it a lot easier and faster, even if you are a coder. And further, by using our software, you can do all of that stuff in one place. You don't need to leverage multiple tools, multiple frameworks. And if you're working as part of a team, one of the really nice advantages is that you can share your work and you can collaborate with others, because all of this stuff is kind of existing in one place, kind of this unified framework. And really, that's kind of what we're gonna show you today. Now, why does it matter to be codeless? I think aside from the fact that not everybody doing testing nowadays is an experienced coder, but anything that we can do that makes the job of embracing test automation easier and faster and more scalable just plain helps these automation initiatives succeed in the long run. And we really do believe that and we're seeing this across our customers, by increasing the pool of contributors and stakeholders that are involved in testing, we can really elevate the importance of testing and really have a much more profound impact on improving quality. The last layer I'll just mention before I hand over to Chris is, and some of you who joined our first call, the first call of our series a couple of weeks ago, you may remember that we made a statement, and I think we said something along the lines of, like, test automation tooling matters, right, in terms of what you pick and how you use it. But really, like, if you're doing the most simplistic types of tests, then it's quite likely that almost any type of tool is going to work for you, right? And why this session, I think, is important for our customers and for those folks that are considering their test automation tooling is that what we've seen is that, the scenarios that you may be looking to automate as you get started, they might be simple, but, looking a little bit further down the road and being confident that the tool that you've selected is going to be able to scale with you even as you start to work on much more complex scenarios being confident that your tooling is going to support that evolution as it happens is we think a very important criteria. And then that's really kind of our mission over here at Subject7. So with all that, I'm gonna zip it, and I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to tell you guys a little bit more about what we're doing at Subject7, and he's going to demonstrate some of these scenarios and best practices, when it comes to advanced test automation. Chris, I don't know if there's anything that you might want to add just before we get started over here, and before you start to actually demo the software.
Yeah, no, I think that was great, Joe. And the one thing I would just say on that last part is a lot of times what we experience is that our users may have somewhat simple initial goals. And then once they start to see the capabilities of Subject7, it's one of those things where it's sort of like, if it can do that, then now we could test this, right? And so a lot of times we'll just find that, coverage can increase, and obviously the complexity can increase with a tool that can do that. So in addition to what you're saying with, like down the road in the future, there's also probably, kind of more coverage that you can get if you do have a more extensive tool for it. So, but anyway, yeah, nice. So I will share my screen. So kind of my goals for today, we will just very quickly go over the test case that we created last week. Just in case anybody's new, or just as a refresher, because it's been a little while, just to kind of get caught up to where we were with the initial test case that we created. This way, we'll also be able to then build on it with the topics that we're going to discuss today, which are data-driven testing, looping, and then also API and database calls as well. All right, so I'm going to play this test in just a second. Then we're going to have a little poll for everybody just to kind of help, help us understand how we can best tailor this webinar for the audience that we have live. But so I'm just going to play this test case, refresh everybody's memory, and then we will kick off a poll in just a second. So this is our demo e-commerce store. Again, if you weren't here for the first webinar, we just use this to, kind of show some of the automation capabilities. So this is a workflow that we created where we, log into an e-commerce application, add a product to the cart, and get to the point of checkout. All right. So we're going to build off this. We're going to, include some data-driven capabilities and, look at APIs and databases as well. But before we do that, if we could, let's kick off the first poll that we have for the group. It'll just be 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that. Nice. All right. Looks like everybody came in. I don't know if I should disclose whether or not we had people who said, wait, you're supposed to test your software. No, but good to know. So it's a little bit of a range, but seems like, for the most part, people are using multiple tools. Again, part of the reason that we asked that is because, as Joe mentioned, we've built a tool here at Subject7 that can allow you to really incorporate all of these into one. And so there's obviously many benefits in terms of just, what you have to get yourself and your staff trained on, but also then, we like to think that there's some additional capabilities based on that, interactive play of, being able to do API testing, database testing, all those types of things under one hood. So, all right, so to jump right in, let's look at the data-driven capabilities of Subject7 using what we call data sets and data templates. Okay, so this test case, as we saw, it goes here to this e-commerce store and runs this flow, right? But let's say that we have multiple versions of this application, right? Maybe we have a we have this production application, but maybe we have a staging environment, maybe we have a dev or a features or even a local branch or something like that, right? Or local environment. So right now, our test case, every time we run this, is going to go to this URL, right? And it certainly doesn't make sense to have to write a new test case just to have the same flow go through a different environment or a different URL, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to delete this URL from here. And before we started this webinar, I've already created a data template. So in a little bit, I'm going to show you how to create them in Subject7. It's very easy. They're very customizable. But just to kind of show the why first and what they do, I'll first show what it looks like to use one. So I have a data template here called demo for data environment. And in this template, I only have one field, right? And that one field is URL. Now I could have created as many fields as I wanted. I could have named them whatever I wanted. This one, I just knew that the only field I needed was the URL, very simple instance. And so I'm going to go ahead and inject this in here now. So we kind of use the verb inject to like put the, like tell the test case that on this run, this is the data that we're going to use. So now what does that do for me here? Well, I can go up here to this little icon that I'll go a little slower. I'll show it again. So this icon in Subject7 here is going to allow me to select the data set. So now I can choose if I want this to run, this test case to run on production, against staging, or against a features branch, right? And again, I could have had as many of these as I wanted. Now, what does the structure of these this data template look like? So as we can see here, I had the one field that I created, and I can then create as many different options as I want that have this different field, right? And so what's going to happen is if I choose production, right? So I have production selected now. When this test case runs on my machine, it's going to go to this production URL, right? If I choose to run it against staging, as you would imagine, it's going to go to that staging URL when it runs it. And then same thing, with features, right? Now, little spoiler alert here at Subject7, we don't have a staging environment of our demo e-commerce platform, right? We kind of do this on purpose. So that way, then when we do show these running in the cloud, we're able to show like, what if one of them was down and wasn't working, right? But so if we do get to a point later where we're looking at the reporting or run this in the cloud, you might see that the staging environment is down because in fact, we actually don't even have a staging environment, right? So what's nice about this, again, is that it allows me to have one test flow that can test against different environments, right? Additionally, once I have this test case set up and ready to run in the cloud, then I can say, run this against all environments, right? So I can have one test suite that will test all of my environments if I wanted, right? And again, we don't have to use this just for the URL. We can use it for many other aspects of our test case as well. I'll give another example. So in this function here, this function, every time we run this function, it's going to log in this user, John Law, right? So in our example test flow that we created in the first webinar here, we created this function from these steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this so that way this function is a little bit more broadly usable, and it isn't going to tie the user to just this. When I say the user, isn't going to tie the tester to this one specific user, right? And we can do that using parameters in your functions in Subject7. So in this parameter field, I'm going to say email, and then password will be parameters, okay? And now instead of always using this as my login, I can say that I want to fill in this email here. And then for the password, I can go ahead and delete this and then say password here for this. Save this. Then in my test case now, I'm able to pass in as parameters to this function, whatever I'd like to have the user get logged in as, right? So if I had John Law at test.com, and then I wanted to add an encrypted password, I could do that, right? But if we want to extend this now and make it so that way we're going to inject data template, I also created a data template for users. So the first time we just had the URL, right? We only had one field, but this time I have two fields. And this includes a pair of data that's an email and a password. So obviously I'm going to inject this in here. Oops, I'll delete this and then go in here like this and say demo users password inject. And so now when I go to my data set selection up here, I can see that I can run my test on production, features, or staging. And now I can choose the user John Law or John Doe, or I could even run this through with the user John Law with a bad password. Now, just to show how this is set up, so we can see that we have two fields here, email and password. And these are all on the same row. What's nice about this is if I want to have John Law be the user that's going to log in, I get to set the email and the password for John Law, right? This one I have John Law then with, a bad password. And then here, this would log John Doe in to this, right? So again, what's nice about this is, it gives me much more flexibility with my test cases. It allows, a single flow of a test case that I've created to be able to test many things, right? So we can even add, more fields than just a couple to a data set, right? But we could also have sort of like flags, kind of, like a true or false type of thing in a data set that would allow me to have things like conditional logic that sort of say, like imagine if I had the user was a different, different email and password, and then maybe it was a different user type, right? So maybe I have one who's an admin, another one who's a super admin, another that's, just a regular member, and maybe another one's a VIP or whatever it might be, right? I can then choose those users and run them through that same flow and say, if this user's a VIP, let's test, these couple steps. Or if it's an admin, let's make sure that they have access to these, additional features. And if it's not, let's make sure they don't have access to those, right? So just to kind of show how to create these data templates, let's go ahead and create a new template. So I'm going to say webinar demo data set users. And so for field, I'll say email here, or I could say username, but email, password, and then user type. This one, I'm going to switch this to password so that way the data is encrypted in our data template. So I can save this. Now I can go right into here. And so this is where I can say, John Law at test.com. And then let's say John Law is an admin, right? So I'll save this. Then I could have John Doe at test.com. There we go. And then let's just say this user is a VIP, right? Now these, you can import these from Excel. We get that question often. So you can upload this from, if you just export your Excel spreadsheet as a CSV, or if you just have a CSV, you can upload these. And that'll just add them, much more quickly, right? Also to note, we can specify which one's the default. So that way, if we don't specifically choose one of these data sets, then, we're gonna use that one by default, okay? So once I've created this now, let me go into here. So now for this, I can do this one and say webinar demo data users. I'll inject the email here. So again, just kind of showing how to create these from scratch. Webinar password, inject. And then if we wanted in here after the user is logged in, I could say something like if, and then here inject webinar user type, inject. If it's a VIP, say, I could perform whatever step I wanted, but I can say this, this is a VIP. All right, so just to kind of give an example, obviously not super, exciting what additional functionality this would do, right? But allows you to just kind of get a sense of the ways these can be used, right? And so now I can choose which user, and based on the user type, I'm now performing conditional logic in my test case to say like, okay, if it's John Doe, I'm going to perform those steps. If not, I'm not going to, right? All right, so let's change this to say admin, and then this is an admin. Is it an VIP? No, a VIP. There we go. Okay. All right, so that kind of gives a sense of how to inject data into your test cases. These we've all run locally on this machine here. In a little bit, I'll show cloud executions and how we can run these at scale with. In fact, you know what? Let's just do that right now. So let's save this. I'm going to go to execution sets here to create a new test case, and then webinar. Let's just say execution set. We'll do it on the default machines. Just for fun, we'll run this on 2. And then we'll go here, webinars in here. I guess I'll just drag all those in. Okay, thank you. Let me clear this. I'll go to webinars. Oh, that's right. Intro to Codeless. I forgot. I thought I named it webinars. Okay, so now here we can see our data. And so we can choose who we want to have run this test case. So we can run it with John Law, and then we can run it for production and staging. And so before on my machine, I was just picking one at a time. But here we're going to save this execution set. And now I can choose to run this in the cloud. And as easy as that, it's going to automatically create the test case scenarios. And so you can see it's got staging and production for Firefox and Chrome here. And so these are queued up right now. These are kind of shared machines for demos. So if we have other demos going on, it might take a little bit for these to queue up and run. Typically, they're very quick, but it looks like maybe there's other test cases running on these machines. But so anyway, just to give you a sense of the power of these data sets, these will all run in parallel now in the cloud, meaning at the same time, right? So if you have many different sets of data to run through the same flow, instead of looping through a test case, and if each test case takes 1 minute, right, and you have 10 of them, it would take 10 minutes to get your results. Well, in Subject7, if you had 10 virtual machines available to you with your licenses, then all 10 of those would run at the exact same time, and in 1 minute, you get your results. Now, with that example, 9 minutes of savings is still substantial, right? But you can imagine that at scale, this gets to be, quite a bit in terms of, the time savings and the effectiveness of running these at scale. All right, I'm going to let those stay in the background for a little bit, and we will talk about now loops. So in Subject7, we have the ability to loop through lists. And so we can kind of manage lists and then loop through them. The way that we do this is I'm going to, I'll just create a new test case. So automated, let's say intro to Codeless looping, right? Just to make that happy. So we'll set a list. Now I'm just going to use as a very simple example. I'm going to call this my days list, and we'll have each day, and then we'll have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, split by a comma, right? I'll say we'll use 1 as the column starting row. So now I'm going to run this. This is going to create a list for me, showing these days list. So here we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And now I can loop through this list. Loop through, you can see it creates a loop. It creates the start and the end. We'll call this the meow. Rhymes with meow. All right, we'll start at 1 and we'll end with at days list rows count. We'll go one at a time. And so now I'm going to print today is, and we will print days list dot day, and then have this, row. Okay. This is going to go kind of quick. So on purpose, I'm going to add a little wait after. So we will wait 1 second. Sounds good. All right. So all this is going to do is it's going to loop through our list, and then it's going to print out, meaning it's going to show a message here saying today is Monday, today is Tuesday, today is Wednesday. Right? If I've done it right, we'll see. You never know with live demos. It's always a coin flip. All right, today is Monday. Coin came up heads. So today is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then it finishes and it goes through, right? So this is also nice for data sets within testing, right? So if you have different test scenarios in Excel or something like that, right? When I created this list, I chose the option to use what's called a split string here, where we just have this text that we're just spacing out by a comma, right? But you certainly could choose an Excel spreadsheet and say, I'm gonna load in this list from Excel and then loop through it, right? Now, a little bit more advanced topic and something that if there's any questions and interest in that kind of stuff, we'd be happy to talk about more in sort of a personalized demo. But just to note that if you do loop through these in Subject7, your automation, let's say you have, 10 rows of an Excel spreadsheet. And, with each of those, you're going to go through a test flow process that's 2 minutes, right? So it's going to create a, purchase order or, whatever it might be, an invoice, whatever the use case is, right? So if you have 10 of those rows and you're going to loop through, that test case would take 20 minutes. And now let's also say that the 9th row of that is going to have something that causes the application to fail, right? It's something in the data, finds a bug in the system, right? Well, if you just loop through it, then your test case in your results is going to, ultimately show that the test case failed, right? Because there was a failure. It was trying to loop through, and eventually on the 9th loop, it failed, right? So typically what we like to suggest as best practice is if you can load that list into a data set, then you can run that flow at scale in the cloud. And let's see if these results are back yet. Okay, great. So these are ready to go. If you can run it through as a data set, then each individual of the rows is going to have its own test case result. So there's 2 benefits of that. One is all 10 of those rows are going to run in parallel. So instead of in 20 minutes, you're going to get your results in 2 minutes. But then also all of them are going to run. And 1 through 8 are going to show they passed, 9 is going to show it failed, and 10 is going to show it passed, right? So it's a little bit beneficial to do that. So there obviously are situations where it's valuable to loop. However, when possible, we like to kind of like pull the looping out into a data set, so that way we can run it in parallel in the cloud, all right? Okay, now to look at API and database testing. So in this test case here, we went and we added a product to our cart. And then we checked to see if the SKU in our cart matched, kind of what we expected it to match. But this was just in the user interface, right? Maybe we also have an API that we want to hit to see, is the value that's shown in the user interface actually being reflected in the API. So what we can do for that is we have the command with, for REST APIs. So if you type in REST, you'll get execute, get, and verify. So we can say get REST value, where we are able to specify the API. So if we have, some API.com, right? Then we can have, some version maybe, and then a path, and then some param equals, and this can be a variable from your test case, right? You could also specify in a payload and have, if you wanted to use that same variable, you could pass that in, right? Or this could be something like, customer ID, right? And maybe you have this customer ID from your test case, right? So this allows you to have really extensive API tests. You can pass any headers into here, anything that you want. And what's nice about this is this view, we had a user, a UI functional test that, just in a very next step, the same flow and the same tool that you're training, yourself or your team on, you can use for API testing. It's not like it's a separate tool to do, right? And you get the benefit of being able to have parameters and that kind of thing in here, right? So let's say that we were going to check to see the SKU, based on the customer ID, we're going to get their cart. So I might know that my response here is, carts, and then, there's a cart object that has, line items that then has a SKU here, right? And so then I can capture the API SKU value from here. I can also get an API status, like a 200 if it passed, 500 if there was a server error, whatever it might be, right? But then this value right here, we can compare it and say, is the SKU, let me open this up, is the SKU here that we got from the UI the same SKU that we had from the API, right? So it's really powerful. And if that was all you were going to do, you could also say verify REST here, where you would make the same kind of API connection here, and then you could verify and say, cart line items 0.SKU, and then that has to equal SKU, right? So you could actually do this all in one step in Subject7 as well. Okay. So let's delete, let's show for databases. So that's for API connections. For databases, we have the ability to execute SQL and then also get a database value. Very similar to the API. where, again, you specify your connection here. And you can, I should show this, so you can choose your database vendor and then just, your connection details. Then you can have a query here where you say, select SKU from carts where, customer ID equals at customer ID, for example, right? This will get that SKU and then set it to a variable here that I could call database SKU, for example, right? Now it's worth mentioning that whatever, details you get as a result of your query here, whatever variables or columns, I guess I should say, you're going to want to have those set as variables in here. If you have a lot of results that you're going to get, like select star from table, then you would want to use this to be the source of one of the lists that we have, which I will show. Set list. So here I can actually use an SQL query to be the source of my list even as well. So for databases, so I'm just going to show a quick, just last thing before I wrap up here. Let me delete these and then let's delete this. Okay, so I think this is kind of back to the flow where we had it with the users. I'm going to show, I have a command in here that if I can remember the name of it, demo API cart verification. Let's see. Okay, so this allows me to pass the SKU that I got from the UI, right? And now this email, I can still inject from that same data set that I had before, right? So this is a nice way to know that the user that logs into this, the user that gets logged into the system here, this email is going to be the same email here. And what this function is going to do, so if you remember, we created functions here with parameters. That's another thing we did here, kind of building on top of the same concepts. This function, as I run this test case, this function is going to go to a database, find the customer ID from the database. Then it's going to go to an API and say, hey, API, what items does that user have in the cart? And it's going to validate to make sure that the item that our user interface is showing matches what's in the API. So here we're getting that value of the SKU, from the user interface here. And you can see all of our steps passed. So this here, went to the database, connected, got the customer ID from the database, then came back. It does a little bit extra just kind of for demonstration purposes. It, shows their, name and street address and that kind of stuff, all just demo data. But just, kind of showing off what the database connections can do. But then it goes from getting that database value to inserting that customer ID, this number 460, into an API call to say, give us the cart for this customer with customer ID 460, right? That then gets a value back from the API, which we can see gets saved here, API SKU, SAMTV. And so then we can go and we can compare that the value that's shown in the user interface matches what's in the API, right? So just a very simple use case. Our users are doing stuff that's way more in-depth and complicated, but just at a high level to kind of pique your interest as to what are some of the things you can do with Subject7 and having that ability of going from a functional test case on the UI to then going right to API and database. Just kind of a nice example of that. And then also showing the data-driven capabilities of running these test cases at scale in the cloud, right? Because I could run this exact same test case. I'm not going to, but I could run this exact same test case for John Doe. And when it did that, it would log in a different user. It would log in John Doe. And then this API, and database connection here would get a different customer ID for John Doe. It would get a different address, different name, all of that. But it would, check to make sure and validate against the same thing here that these values were the same. All right, so it sounds like we have a number of questions available for, or that people are curious for the Q&A. So that was really all I wanted to show in the demo. So I will go to the Q&A to start answering some questions. Okay. All right, I see. I'm going to take them kind of in reverse order for no particular reason. What databases can you connect to? Great question. So let me just open this up just to show. So if I say database, get database value here. So these are the vendors that we support right now. But just to note that all of these, for the most part, have been added when we've had customers that had needs to connect to different types of databases, right? So long as yours, has a JDBC connection capability, if you don't see, whatever database you're using on this list, then it's something that we would be able to work with you and eventually add. And other ones we certainly could put on the roadmap and that kind of stuff as well. But just to mention that for the most part, this tends to have coverage of what our users are using it for. All right, is it possible to get values from a table in the UI and loop through them when the number of rows in the table is not always the same? Oh, okay. So for example, getting a loop with n number of rows. Yeah, great question. So if we had schools, let's say table, just as an example. Okay, so if we had a table like this, I won't actually show this. I mean, I probably could, but just for for being efficient, I won't. But so what we could do in Subject7 is we could use a get web value command here to basically say, how many rows do you have in this table? Okay. And so that would, check this table and say, okay, there's, 6 rows in this one, right? And then what we could do is we could loop through. So we could then create a loop where the counter would be, counting through the rows, and it would go from 1 to 6, let's say, right? And we would create XPaths that would basically say, reference the first row and get this value. And so it would loop through. The first time it would get this value. The second time it would get this value. Third time this one, fourth, fifth, sixth, right? So the short answer is yes, we absolutely can. We have users right now that are doing things like that on a regular basis. Yeah, so it very easily can handle variable data from from the UI, from your API, really from anything. So good question. Okay, is there a way to break a loop? Yes. Let's show it. So do we still have our loop? No, we're out of the loop. Here's the loop. We're back in the loop. All right. So we could have loop break. So we can just do this to break out of the loop. And that can be sort of surrounded by, you might have some conditional logic that, if this is this, then break out of the loop. So good question. All right. Okay. Can you use data templates for localization? I'm assuming that means like, yes. Yeah. So that's actually a very interesting question. We have a very cool use case for that. So I will give an example. So the question again is, can you use data templates to effectively have your test case test against an application that's written, or not written in, but an application that is presented in different languages, right? So if we had this application here, and let's say there was, one of those little icons that we could switch to put this in Spanish or French or, any language, right? We could write one test case, and we actually have a customer who's done this, and it's honestly, it's really, really cool. They have a test case that I don't want to get too, kind of nerdy in here, but let's just pick out a good example here. Okay, so let's just say the add to cart button, right? This, if we had a data template set up for, different text for what the add to cart button was, then we could go in here and we could actually delete this XPath and inject the template. And, we would have a template that's built that, basically says like add to cart button text, and then we could inject this in here, and then we could choose from the data set, and we would have a drop down here that would say like English, French, Spanish, right? We would say, okay. And then in here, we could just inject the English add to cart, right? Now, when I go back to my data set, I could, click and choose this to go to Spanish and say, okay. And then my test case would run, and it would put, my Spanish isn't good enough to know. I wish we had one of our colleagues in here. He'd be able to easily tell me what add to cart is in Spanish. But anyway, it would create an XPath that would be based on whatever language the application is viewed in, right? And so you could have every step in your test case could be pulling that localized value that your XPath would be based on. And so it's really very cool when you do this, that you can have a test case that's 100 steps or 1,000 steps. That really doesn't matter the length of it, but just a very lengthy test case could have the exact same flow, and you just choose and say, run it in English or run it in Spanish. And then, based on your, environment URL, maybe you have a /en or /es or, /fr or whatever it might be. Then it would go to that, that URL that would be in whatever language, you've requested. And then all of your XPaths would work based on the language that you chose. So very good question on that one. Nice. All right. Do we have any other questions that anybody's got popping up? If you do, feel free to throw it into the Q&A. Other than that, Joe, I can kind of pass back to you if you got anything you want to wrap up with.
Yep, and thanks, Chris, and great demo. And I love to see some of these advanced concepts kind of so easily being brought to life as you sort of describe them and stuff like that. You've got a knack for making it simple, even though the concepts are quite complex. And so I guess in wrap up, Chris talked a little bit about some of our customers and how they're using our software. And one thing that I find striking is that there really are no two customers of ours that are using Subject7 in exactly the same way. And that, I think, means something. I think that means that when it comes to the advanced stuff that they're working on, and some of them, and just to give you a sense, some of them are running tens of thousands of tests per day on Subject7. And so these are huge and very highly scaled up sort of testing programs. And the versatility to tackle a lot of different testing challenges from one product that has one GUI that you can train one set of people on that they can all collaborate with is really kind of what we're all about. And so anyhow, I hope you took that away from this session. Of course, we would love to hear from you. If you have any other questions, if you want to go deeper, if you just want to send me or Chris an email, as folks that signed up for this webinar, you're going to get our follow-up note, and that'll tell you how to get in contact. But if you've got any questions, please don't be strangers. We'd love to help to support you, help show you how we can be of service. And then the last thing I'll just say before we break is that we do have our third webinar in this series. It's coming up on November the 29th. I believe that's going to be at 1 p.m. You'll get an email on this anyhow, but just to give you a little bit of a hint, or maybe just elaborate a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about, it is literally the last thing I just mentioned. It is scaling up test automation, right? And so, so far we've covered how we can author test cases codelessly, how we can author sophisticated and advanced test cases codelessly. Now we're going to cover how do you scale up your testing program. And obviously that includes, the example that Chris shared about localization, and somebody asked a question about this, right? If I've got an e-commerce site and I need to offer it in 10 different languages, how do I do that? Do I want to write thousands of separate test cases, or do I want to create one test case that uses parameters to cycle through all the languages as Chris described? So anyhow, we're gonna show some examples of that, talk about how we scale up in the cloud and how we're helping our customers to really get to their testing results much more quickly. So with that, I'll just say thank you to everybody for joining us here today. We really appreciate you guys, appreciate your questions, and we will look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks. And for those that are in the United States, where we are, we'll preemptively wish you a happy Thanksgiving, which is coming up over here. For customers in Canada, your Thanksgiving was a month ago. We hope that you guys had a happy Thanksgiving, and for the rest of the world, we're waiting for you guys to catch up on Thanksgiving. Anyhow, wishing everybody all the best, and thank you again. And as we like to say at Subject7, happy automating. Thank you.